Aloha mai kako. It's a real honor and privilege to be here with my friend and colleague, Dr. Kekuewa Kikiloi, professor at the Center for Hawaiian Studies and kia'i of our cultural resources and advocate for pono resource management all across our islands. So mahalo Kekuewa.
Mahalo, Kamana, for having me here today. So my name is Kekuewa Kikiloi. My primary work is, teaching, doing research, and service for the university and also in our community. On the side, I'm involved in issues of cultural resource management throughout the archipelago. I am involved with a company called Noho Papa Hawaii, and I'm also involved with a nonprofit called Hulia Pa'a.
Your leadership in all these sectors in cultural resource management has really made a difference. And, I hear from so many haumana and people in the community how, your collective effort has really been able to change, some of the outcomes that are happening on our aina and provide jobs to our people. So mahalo for that, man. Maybe we can kind of delve into it and, you can kind of answer, your thoughts like hea ia mea he kapu, hea ke ano ke kapu, iloko kolavena, what is kapu to you, and maybe can you describe or share some of your relationships to kapu?
I think even greater than kapu is the idea of mana. I think that's to me at least, that's the overarching framework of Hawaiian worldview and spirituality, and that kapu goes hand in hand with it though. We have these concepts of kapu and noa, as you know. Kapu is, to be sacred versus noa, which is to be sort of like regular or mundane. There's a dualism there, right? And mana rises or falls on that spectrum. So kapu is really the vehicle to achieve mana, or one of them at least. And I think that kapu is, a concept of making sacred through, they say restriction, but it's also like through discipline. And I think that's probably the key word, discipline. As a lahui, when we look back in our stories and our mo'olelo, our ancestors were extremely disciplined. That was how they lived their lives. They were very self-aware and conscious of the world around them and how to live aligned with that as much as possible. And it does go also hand in hand, like you said, with another concept called kuleana. It's hard to talk about mana and kapu without kuleana, because kuleana is responsibility or rights, that we have. But it's really knowing your place in the world, your position in the world, and what's your function, what's your role, what's your purpose, and also what's not your role and what's not your purpose, and staying within those parameters and thriving in those parameters. At the scale of a society, it can help that, or on an individual level, to make sure that you're basically not screwing up your mana. I think that's probably the way to think about it.
In today's times, do you think kapu is important for our lives today, or maybe you personally and for the lahui?
I do think it's important because it goes again hand in hand with mana. And if for most of us, there's at least some inkling of wanting to know more about Hawaiian spirituality and wanting to know at least about your ancestors and who they were and what they did and what they thought and how did they believe, about things, about the world, and to live your life with that kind of meaning. And if that's sort of the stage or the level of which you get to, then kapu is almost a requirement at that point. At the time of the Ainoa or Battle of Kuamo'o and stuff like that, Hawaiian religion, customs, practices was at the height of complexity, and our ancestors had evolved hundreds of generations to get to that point of complexity and rules and levels of discipline and conduct. And we lost a lot of that, that's for sure. There's still a lot of things that we've retained as well that are still either semi-active or dormant, but I do think we cannot expect to return straight to that. We cannot just we talk a lot about ceremonies today. we're not going to go straight to the aha ceremony on the luakini. That's just how it is because we don't know enough about it and we're in a process of learning. So I feel like there's stages to this, and we're almost starting off at a very early stage again. When you think about it in that context, there's a lot less pressure of like, oh, can I live up to all these kinds of customs and beliefs and levels of discipline? It's like, you can take it down a lot, to a very basic level of how it can apply, to your life, your own individual life, and to basic things that you do.
Yeah, and to think about it, like we're in some ways, like you said, rebuilding,
Yeah,
from, this sort of pinnacle, this PO of practice and kilo
yeah.
and observation and yeah, acquiring mana. So for people that aren't at your sort of level of understanding, where do you start? How would one cultivate kind of an understanding and appreciation for the practice of kapu?
Well, I mean, this is a part where maybe we can plug our center. Kamakuku Kalani is a great place to start off if you are interested in sort of the university route of academia. We provide a great foundation for students, in history, knowledge, political issues, and practice as well. I also want to emphasize that not everybody has to go to the university either. I mean, there's community members that are great leaders that never went to the university. And so I also think that there's knowledge and foundation and understanding in the lahui and in the community. And that's something that we also weave into our classes as well, though. Yeah. So, we always try to partner with community, sort of initiatives. But if you can't go to the university, then definitely try to find some of the efforts that are happening in your local area. I don't know if every ahupua, but definitely every district in the Hawaiian Islands has action going on. There's also, different initiatives that will pop up every so often, like different Oli classes. Hula, obviously, has always been a foundational thing for our culture, and that's a great place to learn about, worldview, different sort of like warrior sort of huis, whether it's halemuas or paluas that do martial arts. And there's numerous sort of like subsets of practice communities that are, all over the place throughout the Hawaiian Islands. And if you can link up to one of those, that's a great way to sort of get into the network. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. So many pathways for our people to kind of
Yeah.
find their way in and develop that appreciation. And I love, your kapu thinking about discipline, in terms of discipline and
Yeah.
practice. And one of those cultural bombs, that were inflicted on us in our
Mhm.
society is that we weren't disciplined, or, we were
Yeah.
not logical and just kind of all over the place, emotional. But I think, kapu really, brings that discipline. And yeah, by any credible account, when you look at our kupuna, you can see there was a lot of rigor and discipline. So I mean, I think restoring some of that is, given the social ailments that we face, as a lahui, being able to recultivate our discipline, I think is awesome. And thinking about your own work, Kekuewa, the field of archaeology is, it's not an
Yeah.
easy one to negotiate and to get through, and especially with the worldview you have as a Kanaka, non-exploitive.
Mhm.
You want to actually recognize the mana of places and the structures and the vahi of our kupuna. As one of the few Hawaiian, doctors in archaeology, what was the role of kapu in shaping your work, or how you went about your efforts? And you already have talked about it with Hulia Pa'a and all these different initiatives.
Yeah. Archaeology is the study of the past through material culture. So that could be, physical sites on the landscape. It can be the artifacts of the past. It can also be the physical remains of our ancestors. Although we don't, as Hawaiians, we don't study that. Yeah, I mean, kapu plays a important role just because they're mea kahiko. They're things of the past for us, and that we need to treat it a lot more thoughtfully. Historically, archaeologists that are not Hawaiian, are not from a particular place, they're not aware of these kinds of worldviews or ideas, and so they just go ahead and muck it all up, basically, just carelessly and recklessly sort of going through things. But from a Hawaiian worldview, you really need to be aware, as important as sort of like, what is the appropriate conduct at a cultural site, and how do we treat it with a level of discipline and self-awareness so that we're not impacting sort of the sanctity of this place, right? We try to incorporate protocol into the work we do through chants, particular rules or customs, and or giving offerings. That customs part is really important as well. I mean, it means that when you go to a place, you try to find out if there's a steward or a kiai that is the primary caretaker, and you ask them first, and you inform them of maybe the project or what's going on, and you try to rope them in as early as possible because that's their place that they're taking care of and that you're just a guest. All of these kinds of considerations need to be made when you're working in places and communities. It also applies to sort of the material culture in the museums or collections. Some of this stuff like carries energy from the past, and if you're not careful on how you conduct yourself or the kinds of pule or prayers that you do or don't do, it can have impacts on you. And then of course iwi kupuna, that's another thing that is obviously a very sensitive thing, the remains of our ancestors. So as native archaeologists, it's been our role to try to facilitate the return of these kupuna back to these places, working with practitioners to make sure that our ancestors are returned to where they're from. And that whole process is a lot of kaumaha as well, right? And so you really need to sort of manage those things so that it doesn't become a problem for you. It's sort of like la'au lapa'au. People have to be aware of that as well, I think, where when they're treating people, they can pick up the negative aspects of their work and carry it home if they're not careful. I think it's the same thing for archaeologists. I've had times when negative things did happen, and it's really a process of trying to backtrack and figure out, like, how do we sort these things out? How do I make sure that I'm protected? Do I remember to cleanse afterwards? Things like that, so that I'm not carrying all these things around with me while I'm trying to make things pono.
Yeah, not a easy space to operate in, brother, and really appreciate all your work and the dedication you have to doing pono in these difficult spaces, and across disciplines, or even within a discipline where parts of it are super extractive and aren't going to think about our worldview necessarily. And again, you've done so much. I also think about the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, our kupuna islands there, and some of your work and efforts there. And yeah, maybe would you want to share just some of how KAPU shapes this work that you've done there?
The Northwest Hawaiian Islands are a series of islands, about 10 of them, that extend past our main chain, past Niihau for about 1,200 miles or so. More recently, in the past 2 decades, we've been fighting for the protection of this area as a marine protected area. So it's gotten a lot of attention both nationally and globally as sort of a model for co-management of indigenous peoples with colonizing sort of countries in protecting large areas of the planet. A big part of my work was really trying to do detective work and trying to understand, what was the connection of our people to this place, because how did we get to a point where we have cultural amnesia and have forgotten about 2/3 of our homeland? It just seems very strange, the situation when I first started researching this about 20 years ago. And through the process of looking at historical records, especially focusing those written by Hawaiian authors in Hawaiian language, and then also doing some level of ethnography and trying to gather mana'o from living people today that have memory of these things, and then also trying to apply archaeology as a Western tool, but trying to Hawaiianize it in a way that helps to answer the questions that I was interested in. We're able to sort of reveal that this place is actually really important to the origins of our peoples and the origin stories and chants as a place of creation for us. It's really taught me about these concepts of mana and kapu. Going to these places. In a lot of ways, protected areas are sort of the modern, I guess, equivalent, if there is one, to this idea of kapu, where we're placing regions or species or things under restriction so that we as people are not conflicting with the resource. And so going up there, it really opened my eyes, because here in the main Hawaiian Islands, we live in a real compromised environment. Like here in town, in Honolulu, very compromised. So much of it has been paved over, like the natural waterways are rerouted. The lo'i systems have dried up that were once running all the way from the back of the valleys to the beaches. We've altered the landscape as modern human beings so much. We've treated it with so much noa that the kapu was diminished. And then now we're left with a landscape that you don't feel mana anymore. Not in quite the same way that our ancestors did. And so going to the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, it's a place that is entirely pristine, teeming with wildlife like we've never seen before. Millions of birds above your head, fish that are like littered in the water, like so much that you don't need to go to the aquarium. It's like right offshore. I've never experienced anything like that in my life. And so it made me realize that this is what a sacred place looks like at its fullest, right? Where all these living things are in harmony and in balance and aligned with human beings in a way that it's all flowing with energy. And we believe that our ancestors and our akua, right, are in the hinolao, the body forms of these things. And so like ancestors are everywhere around you, and it's such an amazing feeling to go there. And then when you add in the archaeology with these ancient sites, it just heightens the feeling, right? And so you can't help but think like, I need to act appropriately here. This is like the life pulse of the earth that I'm experiencing, and that you're not the most important thing there. And I think that's sort of the sacredness, right? Is that you realizing that you're not the most important thing, and that you're probably not even the middle thing. You're like on the bottom somewhere. And this is the home of all these living entities, and you're just a guest there. And so behave like a guest, and act appropriate. Do not speak out of turn. Try to minimize your impact. Be very humble about how you approach the landscape. And that to me is sort of the basis of that idea of kapu, is just being like super self-aware that you could, like, as people, we can destroy everything if we're not careful, so we need to have self-control on how we do things.
Wow, bro, what a powerful mo'olelo and image you're painting there, just thinking of that abundance and that thriving abundance, and realizing where we are in that lineage in the Kumulipo is we're not in the beginning. We're not the top. We're not the origin. Yeah, and then I imagine, places with names like Moku Mana Mana, and, just, to me, just that name, the reverence and almost intimidation.
It is.
Yeah.
There is a level of intimidation there. I think there's just so much energy when you get there. As Hawaiians that are involved with the co-management of that area, it's really important for us to orient and teach people about what's the appropriate behavior when you get there, because it's so easy for people just to think that it's another place, and that nobody's there, so we can do what we want. Or researchers like just being totally consumed with their research agenda and all that, and not stopping and taking pause to realize that they're encountering something really sacred, and that there's a higher level energy there that can be one of the greatest experiences of your life, or perhaps maybe one of the worst if you're not acting appropriate.
What are your thoughts on the relationships between the Aikapu and sort of resource or governance, systems of our kupuna? Like, you read the simple Haole archaeology, and they just talk about, separation, women and men and eating, and whatever, men cook, and a more in-depth kind of understanding. Like, what do you think is that relationship or that structure that Aikapu was about when it comes to governance of resource and consumption?
I mean, people and land are almost synonymous in the way they're treated, so we identify with the lands that we come from, and we embody those traits and characteristics, and we speak for the land and protect the land, and the land in turn cares and feeds us. And then there's also a aspect of Hawaiian identity that is you are what you eat. And that's something that we haven't really explored well as a community and as a lahui, where so much of Hawaiian identity was about the things you ate, and that it should come from the lands in which you cared for, right? And we are so far away from that reality right now because our lands are taken, they're developed in different ways that aren't producing foods. We don't have a shared responsibility in caring for it that leads to well being and mental health. And we definitely aren't eating the things from the land that should be nurturing the physical body, right? And so there's so much levels of disconnection that happens through colonization that we're at such a loss sometimes, right? In the struggles that we're fighting. Although I don't think we'll ever go back to what is the exact aikapu, of like women not eating particular things. I do think that it's a philosophy of being too, that we should be eating well. And for me, I don't. I'll be perfectly honest. I don't. I eat a lot of fast food because I'm constantly rushing around. A lot of it is because of convenience, right? We don't have these systems of distributions that set up that allows us to eat healthy. Sometimes it's more expensive too. And so as a lahui, I think we really need to focus on that, a lot more. I do think that the aikapu is about today as well. We as a people have so many health problems, diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, things like that. It's a product of this disconnection that's been happening. So when I look at like the Aloha Aina movement to either protect the water in Red Hill or to protect our mauna, or the restoration work that so many of our friends are doing, the Pai Paiohei and different places, right? That's all feeding into this idea of, to me, aikapu as well. And we're trying to get there, yeah, and we will get there. But the disconnection was so severe, I think that we're still trying to fight that battle to reconnect those things.
Yeah, bro. I think that's really profound. Thinking about that, eating from the things, the places that you care for in Malama, and
Yeah.
that relationship and that connection, and it makes so much sense. If Heli Ika, that which feeds us is the leader, is almost like the akua, right? And then aikapu, then what we eat, got to be disciplined, got to be sacred, and we have to be thoughtful. And Kumujan Kimikawa used to talk about with the aha aina, the things that you consume on a family level, different from the aikapu, but still just recognizing even the names have mana of the things that you consume and a resonance and can manifest themselves, and you would want to consume things for the baby to bring out, certain aspects that you'd want to see in Ola, in their lives. So I think we do have a lot of ways to go when it comes to thinking about, the sanctity of what we eat and what we consume and what we share, together.
Yeah, one of the things too is, just this idea that like the way we saw food and these natural resources were the body forms of the gods. We don't think of our food like of anything like that anymore. It's so noa. It's so like whatever's is the way we eat. And then I also, like researching a lot about ceremony, particular foods, because aikapu is an element of a lot of ceremonies, not just traditional custom that are structured how we eat in general, but in ceremonies in particular. Almost all the foods that are selected have symbolic meaning from the names that we name the food. There's all this wordplay that occurs inside of the words. Our ancestors believe that that symbolism also benefited us when we ate it, and those are things that we don't even consider anymore.
You talk about aina, right? Aina is that which feeds. And so when we kind of treat it as noa, it diminishes that kapu of the aina. And maybe, I guess, some of that, it's mana, it's like potency and being able to produce
Mhm.
ai. Um, so I guess, like, if the land is devoid of or lacking that capacity to nourish, is it called aina at that point? or is it
Wow.
something else? That just came to mind when I was listening to you folks.
I think it still is, just because that's the intended function, of what land is supposed to do, and that serves as a reminder.
If I can add to that question, Kelsey, Malo says makanoho ana ke kanaka he kapa ia he aina. So he gives like two. One is moku,
Right.
and it's when it's surrounded by ocean, and then but when people are together in that place and that makanoho ana, so it's like that living, that relationship together, that's when it's named Aina. So I think that means even if it's degraded, even if the Navy dumped jet fuel in there, it's still, like Kikuewa was saying, the function is Aina. I mean, that's on us because it has that capacity to feed, right? So I think that's part of what, like, even though Aikapu doesn't exist, and I think a lot of our understanding of this has shifted, and like Keiko said, we're rebuilding, but I think there's an emotional, like there's a intergenerational response to something like Red Hill because it's so egregious, because it's so against our something in our bodies that are going, what, cannot. Oh, that's a heavy one though. I'm gonna. Whew.
No, yeah, I mean, I remember that quote, that Marlowe quote, and so it's like thinking, does that mean, I guess that is that Moku, that place that didn't have people in it, or a relationship, you know?
Well, I don't know. That's where I think of like Moku Manu. Maybe Moku Mana Mana is like this too. Like there wasn't like this long term residence. I don't know. What do you think about that, Kikuewa?
Well, there was a term that I saw in the Mo'olelo that I've been using for that, because I do remember some of your students saying that, and I was kind of like, oh, what does that mean for the Northwest Hawaiian Islands then? But in the Mo'olelo, they call it Aina Akua. And so I guess because maybe the spirits of the ancestors are still there, and travel in those areas, Hawaiians still like noho there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about that in terms of like not just Aina that physically feeds, right? But like spiritual,
Mhm.
intellectual nourishment. So that's interesting to think of it called Aina Aqua, as like that's Aina that's feeding the Aqua in those spaces. There is no place that doesn't feed in some way in that kind of a consciousness.
Yeah. So Nolela, mahalo nui, Kekuewa. This has been super rich and enlightening for me, and I think for everyone that's going to be listening, in terms of these incredible insights you have on our relationships to kapu, both personally and at the lahui level. So cannot thank you enough, and mahalo for what are really important but kind of challenging conversations. So yeah, bro, thank you.
Yeah, mahalo for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.